In the days of Israel's king Ahab, there was trouble brewing with the neighboring nation of Aram, also known as Syria. They had seized the Israeli city of Ramoth-Gilead, and King Ahab wanted it back. He decided to form an alliance with King Jehoshaphat of Judah, and together they would march on Ramoth-Gilead and take it back. Now Jehoshaphat was willing to join Ahab in war, but he wanted to make sure that this was a good idea. So before making any plans, he told Ahab, "First, seek the word of the Lord." So Ahab assembled 400 of his prophets, and he asked them, "Should I attack Ramoth-Gilead?" And without exception, all of them answered, "Yes, attack and win. The Lord will give the victory into your hands." So it looked like they should go to war. But Jehoshaphat still wasn't convinced. He then asked, "Is there not a prophet of the Lord here whom we can inquire of?" Now Ahab reluctantly admitted that there was one more prophet named Micaiah, son of Imlah, but he warned Jehoshaphat that this man didn't usually say nice things. In fact, he continued, "I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me, only bad." Though Jehoshaphat insisted, Ahab finally sent a messenger to get Micaiah, but on the way, the messenger tried to convince Micaiah to say what Ahab wanted to hear. "Look, all the other prophets have said good things about the king. Let your word agree with theirs. Speak favorably and say whatever the king's heart desires." But Micaiah responded firmly, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will say only what the Lord tells me." Soon, both kings were standing before Micaiah waiting for him to speak. So Ahab asked, "Shall we go to war with Ramoth-Gilead or not?" At first, Micaiah answered by repeating what the other prophets had already said, "Attack and be victorious. The Lord will give the king success." Then Ahab pressed him, "How many times must I make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" And after he had sworn, Micaiah began to speak plainly. He said, "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd, and the Lord said, 'These people have no master, let each one go home in peace.'" Ahab immediately turned to Jehoshaphat and said, "Didn't I tell you, he never prophesies anything good about me?" But Micaiah wasn't finished. He continued, "The Lord says this, I saw the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven around him. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth-Gilead and going to his death there?" One spirit suggested this, and another that. Finally, a spirit came forward and said, "I will entice him." "How?" the Lord asked. "I will be a lying spirit in the mouths of all his prophets," he said. And the Lord said, "You will succeed." Then Micaiah declared, "So now the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of all these prophets of yours. The Lord has decreed disaster for you." Then, just as Micaiah predicted, one of the false prophets, Zedekiah, struck him on the cheek and said, "How dare you make fun of the king?" After that, Ahab ordered that Micaiah be thrown into prison and fed nothing but bread and water until he returned safely. That is, until they were done with him. To that, Micaiah boldly replied, "If you ever return safely, the Lord has not spoken through me." Then he added, "Then mark my words, all you people." Later, Ahab listened to the other prophets who told him that he could attack Ramoth-Gilead and win, so he made plans and marched out to meet the Syrians. But soon his charioteers came running back to tell him that the Syrians had left their camp and fled. Thinking that this was a trick, Ahab disguised himself and drove down to the nearby valley to see what was happening. But as he took a peek over the hill, he was seen by an Aramean captain, and they shot an arrow that hit Ahab right between the scales of his armor. He was taken back to his chariot and died. When Jehoshaphat heard about Ahab's death, he cut off the false prophets' heads. Later, when Ahab's son Ahaziah took the throne, God sent a prophet to tell him that because he had followed his father's path, he would die the same way. Then Ahaziah begged the prophet, "Please don't tell me any more bad news. Please tell me something good instead." But the prophet simply repeated, "Therefore, since you have been so eager to know God's message, he will grant you what you want. You will die the same kind of death his father died." So if you notice, all the characters in this passage, except for Jehoshaphat, ended up dying horrible deaths. They faced God's judgment because they refused to walk in his ways. But God gave Jehoshaphat, the only one who earnestly sought God's will, an extended period of peace and prosperity. He reigned over Judah for 25 years, longer than any of the kings of Israel during this time period. So what caused such drastically different outcomes for these men? What made Jehoshaphat stand out among these kings? Well, he was willing to do what the others weren't. He was willing to seek the word of the Lord, and he didn't stop until he got an answer. Now, we don't know exactly how long Jehoshaphat waited to get God's response, but we do know that he didn't settle for a quick fix. He didn't just run to the first prophet he met on the street and ask, "Hey, what does God think about me going to war?" Instead, he went to over 400 prophets, wanting to hear from as many as possible. And yet, even after hearing 400 yes answers, he didn't feel complete. It was only when he asked specifically for someone who spoke God's truth that he heard the actual truth. And he didn't hear what he wanted to hear, but he heard what he needed to hear. This teaches us that seeking God isn't just a once-in-a-while thing. It should be a lifestyle. And it shouldn't be a formality either. We shouldn't just run through the motions asking, "God, what should I do?" and then immediately tuning out his voice. Instead, we need to develop a habit of spending time with God, listening to his word, and carefully considering how we respond. But most importantly, we must be careful not to settle for easy answers or popular opinions. Often we'll hear what we want to hear rather than what we need to hear. We need to learn how to step out of the crowd and follow God's truth, no matter what the cost. So let me ask you, are you willing to go where few people go, to wait until you hear God's voice clearly, to listen to his truth even when it's unpopular? Are you willing to follow God's plan even if it does unseem to make sense or it's difficult to understand? If so, then take some time right now to thank God that he wants to lead you, guide you, and help you to understand his will.